I want to talk to you a little bit about DFSS, and when I say a little bit, I really do mean a little bit. Let's start out at least by talking about what can go. The reason that we have DFSS is at least because some people find designing things harder than simply improving things, and in fact, many studies have shown that we're pretty horrible at designing things. We design a lot of things with that essentially makes our jobs will never need to go away, because there will always be improvements that can be made because of poor implementation, things that were forgotten, etc., etc. But I want to ping you a little bit, and I want to ask you, in your opinion, what are some of the things that, what are some of the really big mistakes in design? Big, small mistakes that we make or that companies make when designing either processes or products or services. So get out your piece of paper and take 15 seconds again, and I just want you to think about what are some mistakes that businesses make when designing processes, products, and services. You can think of examples if you want to. That's fine to bring to the table. But where are mistakes made? Okay, let's go around the room, and I'm going to ask Sue first. Sue, are you there?
Hi, Mark.
Yes, hi, Sue.
Sorry that I was late today.
Okay. Is Shani with you?
Go ahead.
Is Shani with you?
I have written down that they don't think about what the customer's needs are.
Okay. Don't think about
process or product.
Don't think about customer needs. Okay, biggie, right? Design something that nobody wants. All right. Okay, excellent. Let's go to Brad.
I was going to say what she said, but also companies design around what their capabilities are instead of what the market's demanding. And I think a good example of that for the company that did not do that would be Apple, where Steve Jobs walks in the room and says, I don't care what we can or can't do. I want a device that you push one button and it turns on. And instead of so they get focused on here's what we can do instead of here's what we need to develop our capabilities to.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. I like that. I mean, Apple these days is talked about as the design company. I think part of that is real and part of that is lore. But yeah, there's an interesting disconnect, I think, with not disconnect, but maybe a conundrum or paradox with Steve Jobs, and that is that in some ways he didn't listen to customers, because customers tell you that if you ask them, customers tell you all sorts of features that they want. And in a lot of ways, the beauty of Apple designs is they don't give you what you want. They don't give you all these things that you can push. And maybe people don't tell you what they want, but they tell you what they think they want. Maybe that's not the same thing. All right, anyway, just a food for thought. Excellent.
We run into that a lot in healthcare by definition, most of the time, our customers don't want what we have. And,
right.
And they certainly don't have the expertise to know what they need. So that's always something we have to juggle.
Right. And that happens in all sorts of, that happens certainly in healthcare insurance too, basically the same thing, or very similar sort of thing. And there's even a metric in call centers, right, that people call one and done or first call resolution. That is, when I call, I want my call to be resolved on the first call. And if you think about it, I actually want zero call resolution. I don't want to have to ever call. There's an interesting. I think that's a good point to make. All right. Yeah, and also I know that what Sue said is actually rather broad. So that's so it's fair game to give examples within that. Okay, Patrick, what was an example that you had? Hello, Patrick. Okay. All right. Now I'd like you to take a moment, and I'd like you to take a moment and to give one example of a poorly designed product or service, and let's take a moment to do that. So take another 10 seconds and just think of an example that you think, boy, that was a stupid design. That was a poor design. It could be just an aspect of something. Write it down so that your muscle memory, your memory muscle gets built up. Oops, I didn't want to slight Tracy if Tracy is still on.
I'm here.
Oh, I should have asked you. See that? Oh, goodness. So we'll ask you for an example this time. That's good. All right, so let's go around the room. So I'll ask you first, Tracy. What's an example of something that you think was poorly designed, a product or service? Could be either.
I have a couple of examples. Just recently, I think that the process that we put into place, for example, how to get what steps we need to follow to get SCIP, all the SCIP core measures accomplished in the pre-op holding area in the OR. We designed this great sticker, and it was going to solve our world, and it didn't. It didn't work. And I'm trying to really put my finger on what was so poorly designed about it. That's a better thing of just an example of mistakes we make. We didn't build into the process any sort of monitoring and immediate feedback on we did it right or we did it wrong, and so we didn't really know it was poorly designed until it bit us.
Okay, great. Well, I love the example. I don't quite understand it, but I love how you kind of deconstructed that. So I think that's very useful for part of the discussion we'll have. Patrick, are you back? No. Brad, what's an example of something, either a product or service, that you think was poorly designed?
There's a company that I have to send data to for our biometric screening, and then they coordinate with the health insurances to reduce the discounts and all that. They are impossible to work with because they want us to format the data based on their specifications, including fields we never use. Getting the data to them is impossible, and the whole time we're not even in the data collection business. They are. But from their perspective, they design their process around what they could do instead of what we needed.
Yep. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, chances are you were thinking about that when you actually gave that answer. So that's good. And so what's an example that you have? Sue or Shani, are you there? Okay. I'm going to give a very mundane example. I think the USB is a terrible design. Because when I'm often working with my computer, I work late with my computer, I don't know which way is up, and I can't read that stupid little label that's on there. Wouldn't it be cool if I could only put it in one way? Anyway, I always think that the USB on all the peripheral devices that we put in is kind of a poor design. But anyway, there's lots of examples like that. And the reasoning very often is we design maybe a lot of things are not designed as well. We just don't even design it. So,
Mark?
yes.
I'm sorry, Sue. This is Sue. I did have a couple examples. I didn't realize I was on mute.
Oh, okay. Go ahead and share one with us.
But two are personal because, I just became a homeowner.
Sure.
So one is a product. I just bought a weed whacker, and I couldn't start it, so I had to return it. So in my opinion, it was poorly designed because not anybody can start it.
Got it.
And then my second is an experience with AT&T because I was switching back from having their phone coverage and then their internet, and I just went over to just have their internet, and I had to get a whole new ID number associated with it. I had to reload everything. So to me, the service was poorly designed.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two personal experiences I've gone through in the past couple months.
Okay, yeah. Very, very good. So excellent examples. So I want to talk to you a little bit about DFSS. DFSS is a way that is attempted, when we use DFSS, we attempt to alleviate a lot of those problems. And as I go through just the very basic DFSS process, which I'm going to share with you, I think you'll see how it can really, alleviate that. So here's what the DFSS process looks like. Like I said, it's demand V. It's not DMAIC. So the first three steps are very, very similar, except that we make a much bigger deal of the define and measure phases, where we're really thinking about the customer and using very deliberate processes. So if you think Six Sigma process or Lean Six Sigma projects are heavily loaded in the front end, because we've got to decide what's the problem that we're really solving, what are the metrics that we're using, what's the business case. A DFSS process is even more loaded in the front end. But you can see that what we're doing is we're moving from where in the beginning we're defining what the customer priorities are, and then we're selecting the concepts that we can use, and then we're kind of developing them and testing them. Okay? So if you look down here, you'll see many tools that are similar. So there's scoping, business case, but there's a lot of customer ID and prioritization. There's a tool called the Kano model. We discussed that. And then there's throughout this, there are two things that you'll notice that are repeated. There's our SIPOC, but it's got a little fancy T at the end. It's a slightly different. It's a SIPOC with a trigger, so it's slightly different than the SIPOC that we used, but not much. There's our modeling, which we could use queuing or we could use process simulation. There's FMEA throughout. But you'll notice, if you look very carefully and you have eagle eyes, you'll notice that there's a tool there. There are two tools that are listed in many of them. I'm going to cross them out now. I meant to circle them. MGP and HOQ. Oh, should have just done both. MGP stands for Multi-Generational Plan, and HOQ stands for House of Quality. And the House of Quality is actually a great way of understanding how the whole DFSS process works, so I'm going to take a little time talking to you about it. But the MGP, Multi-Generational Plan, is an acknowledgement up front that if we're going to do this right, for most big businesses, they can't do everything at once. So we're going to chunk it out. And the way to think about that is maybe, Kennedy in I believe it was 1960, said we're going to land a man safely to Earth, or maybe it's 61. It must have been 61 actually. We're going to send a man to the moon and land him, bring him back safely on Earth. We're going to get a man to the moon. Well, we didn't just shoot the guy to the moon. We first did the Mercury program, which was sending and send up satellites up first, and then the Mercury program and the Gemini, and so forth. And eventually, we had the right rockets, and we understood how people were going to react in space enough, so that we actually could send a man up to the moon. It took a great effort, but it didn't all happen at once. I'm not going to talk about multi-generational plans in this class, but we can kind of think of it as first stage is stop the bleeding, second generation is maybe take the offensive, and third generation might be rule the market or be the first or second player in the market. That might be a way of doing it. And as the reason why you use it multiple times in the design is because you're becoming more and more tactical. The first place, you just kind of articulated almost like I did. And then over time, that MGP becomes something that becomes very hardened and tactical. We're putting it in terms of metrics. And then we're putting it in terms of design metrics. So that's what happens over time with the MGP. Let me show you what the HOQ is. HOQ stands for House of Quality. And what a House of Quality does, throughout the design process, you start from every design in Design for Six Sigma starts with the customer and then relates what's called the what's to the hows. The hows are all over here. So first we say, what are the customer needs, and we translate those via the House of Quality into metrics. So we make sure that we don't have too many metrics or too few metrics to be able to really meet the top customer needs, and we prioritize those metrics. In the second stage of the design, we start from the metrics and then say, okay, if we're going to have the metric, if we're going to satisfy these metrics, what functions do we actually need to make sure that that happens? And then we take the functional needs, build a high-level design, and finally we take the high-level design requirements and build our detailed requirements. Here's where we get detailed design. So that when we build out the phone system, we're making that choice about which brand of phone and how many lines and how many servers and how many CSRs do we need based on a high-level design requirement. And that design requirement can be traced all the way back to the metrics that we have and all the way back to the customer needs. So when you do this, you're really building a design that takes into account customer needs all the way flowing back all the way down into the design. So that's the idea, and it uses a tool called HOQ to do that. So anyway, basically, it's an attempt to move from a very reactive design, which is DMAIC or lean, right? We look at our current business and we notice that there's a problem, and we're trying to fix the problem. It's really sort of after the fact and so forth, and we're trying to move it to proactive design. So we're going to be doing extensive VOC collection. We're going to be understanding how that VOC flows into, I use the term CTQ throughout here, that stands for critical to quality. You can think of that as a measurement that of something. You can think of that as a measure of a customer need. We're going to be able to predict the capability of our design before we build it. We're going to be able to measure to meet those CTQs and so forth. Anyway, this kind of reads like a commercial. So I'm not going to give you the commercial, but I will tell you sort of what are the differences if we think about it from a high level between, say, DMAIC or lean workout, LWO, and improvement projects. Improvement projects. This would be DFSS over here / DMADV, right? That's the process we're using, not DMADE, DMADV. On the left-hand side, we have a focus on improving existing processes and products. On the right-hand side, for DFSS, we're focusing on designing new products or new processes or new services. On the left-hand side, in improvement projects, we're going to focus primarily on one CTQ. Think about it. For your discharge process improvement, you're thinking about taking out time out of that. That's the main thing. If you have to focus on 12 different things, it's almost like a non sequitur. I can't focus on 12 different things. In a design project, you have no excuse. You can't simply design something for cycle time without taking into account cost and quality. You have to do all of them. In an improvement project, we're thinking on trying to fix the root causes that drive the CTQ. What drives the time in discharge? What drives my errors or my variation in length of stay for bowel surgery DRG? What drives net promoter score? And instead, we're going to build services that meet those immediately. We're not trying to fix problems. We're trying to prevent the problems beforehand. So that's about it. It's worked pretty well, and I know at least one person on the lecture can attest that it's a pretty structured and rigorous process. It certainly creates very realistic build targets and business cases, and sometimes that means that the business case doesn't get executed, which is too bad. But at least it's an honest look. And when you're building something, it's great to have it traceable all the way back to the customer, to what customer needs. All right. I will freely admit that we have just scratched the surface of, we have totally just scratched the surface of this. But I think if you take some time spending it on here's the process and here's how it looks and feels, you can even, I'm just going to get rid of all my scribble and scratches, that you can kind of get an idea for how it works. And if you want to know more, you can either call me or we can find, I can help you find a good reference or two for learning this. Okay. Any comments or questions before we move on? Okay. Like I said, just scratch the surface with the MADV. All right, I would like to move forward, and I want to talk to you a little bit about Hoshin and the balanced scorecard. I really want to mostly talk about Hoshin because Hoshin is, let's see, let me go to 103. So we're going to start talking about what was on slide 103. What Hoshin Kanri is it was developed actually a long time ago. It was developed in the 60s. And what it is it's a method to connect strategy and tactics. So one way of thinking about it is this, currently with a lot of cases, a CEO or the board may develop a vision, and there's tons of strategic planning that goes on. But it's almost like pushing a wet noodle to get the results. So sometimes the results happen, sometimes they don't. We don't get good feedback on whether they do or don't. So Hoshin is an attempt to essentially pull the noodle, if you will, and to create both results and the knowledge about what results worked, what results or what parts of the strategic plan worked, what parts of the strategic plan didn't, what adjustments need to be made, and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'll show you kind of the basics of how it works. There are some slides in here about a balanced scorecard. And I just want to remind you that in the balanced scorecard, this was Kaplan and Norton starting in '96. They developed the balanced scorecard based on 4 key levers, and those were financial metrics, customer, internal business measures like processes and regulatory processes, innovation processes, operations processes, and what they called innovation and learning, or intangible capital, how we can put all of our knowledge about management and working in teams and goodwill that we have between employees, how we can put that into, as well as our IT systems, right, and technology, how we can leverage that to actually create financial and customer value. That's what the balanced scorecard does. What Hoshin does is it tries to put all of that into action. So let's talk a little bit about what Hoshin looks like. Before I do that, I want us to brainstorm just a little bit, and I would like to ask you, let's ask the question, realizing that we're moving pretty quickly here, seeing that Hoshin is by the way, let's see. Hoshin, this stands, I think, literally for like pointing needle. This is like essentially an aim or a plan. And Kanri is actually two words put together. The first one is tube or a pipe, and the second one is reason, logic, etc. So it's essentially, the way that I think of this is sort of like an aim or a plan that's managed. So it's a managed plan. That's where you get Hoshin Kanri. Anyway, I want to brainstorm what are, if we can, what are characteristics of good plans or planners. Why don't we stick on that one? So if we all know some people who are good at planning. What are the characteristics that they share? What are some characteristics that they have? So I'd like to take a little bit of time, and we will brainstorm that. And let's see. All right. So let's take a moment and brainstorm that. So again, take your 15 seconds and think of a good one and write it down and be prepared to share. Okay, let's go around the room. Tracy, if I can put you on the spot, you're the first one. What is a characteristic of a good planner?
I don't know. Maybe I'm being too micro, but the good planners I know are thorough and detail-oriented.
Okay, excellent. Detail-oriented. Okay, good. Sue, what's an example or what's a characteristic that you came up with?
Similar to Tracy, I said they should be specific, but I also have that they should be measurable.
Okay. And Brad, what's something that you had written down?
They should be simple. There shouldn't be a whole bunch of ands in the goal statement.
Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, well, here's the list that I came up with kind of beforehand. Good planners ID critical few. Good planners know that, for example, we can't do everything. So we're going to identify the critical few initiatives that we really can do. Good planners manage resource constraints very well. I think a lot of these you're going to see some significant overlap, but maybe some other ideas. Manage resource constraints very well. Good planners establish performance measures. That's basically what Sue was saying. Okay. Good planners develop detailed plans, detailed implementation plans. And good planners check and are flexible with plans. That is, adapt. So what was it? General Eisenhower, right? One of the greatest planners ever, at least in the last century, in the 20th century, said plans are useless, but planning is essential. And what he meant by that was, yeah, you have to work out the details, knowing for a fact that those details will not all happen. But if you don't do it, you won't have the wherewithal and the expertise and the knowledge to be able to be flexible enough to handle the situations that inevitably come up in war and in business. And so if we don't check and continually review, It's no good to have performance measures if we don't check to see that we met them. Okay, and then finally, really good planners focus on today and tomorrow. I think Jack Welch said, any fool can eat today, but it's eating in the long run that really matters. It's both, actually. I think he said any fool can eat today or plan for the long term. I'm not being as eloquent as he would no doubt be. But to do both is really the trick. So anyway, this is kind of the list that I came up with, and I think all three of yours really kind of come through. I love the idea of being simple and transparent and clear. I think that's significantly different. The detail-oriented and measurable, I think, are kind of contained in there. But those are all great. Those are all great examples. Well, the good news is that Hoshin has all of this stuff. So let me show you how it basically works. I want to tell you a little bit about maybe some tricks about what we can and can't do what Hoshin pitfalls are. So as I said, it bridges the gap between the vision and the tactical execution. And there's 3 parts to the plan. Some people will say there's 5 parts, and I'll tell you what those other 2 are. The 2 other parts are kind of incidental. But there's business fundamentals. So business fundamentals plan tells us how we need to manage the business today. It answers the first Peter Drucker question of any business. That Peter Drucker had 3 questions for business, for management. He said all managers need to know, A, what is our business today? B, what should our business be? And C, what will our business be? Because should and will are 2 different things. And so these 3 parts answer those 3 questions. Business fundamentals answers the question, what is our business today? Business fundamentals is essentially a plan for saying, what do we need to do to keep the lights on, to keep the same customers we got today, to keep servicing today? The second question is handled by the long-term plan. Where should we be is handled by the long-term Hoshin plan. And then there's an annual plan which says, okay, what are we going to be? It's a decision that says, okay, yes, we have a finite amount of resource. Yes, we have this broad vision. What are we going to do in the next year? How many projects are we going to do? Which ones are we going to nail 100%? Which ones are we not going to do? And then how are we going to measure? And so forth. Okay, so essentially, here's the difference between one of the main problems with balanced scorecard and its implementation that people have found out is that they didn't have this bridge between the 2 things that we need to do. We definitely still need to keep the lights on. And when push comes shove, that's the thing that people do. They try to keep the lights on instead of doing the stuff that we all need to do long term. So Hoshin solves that, at least partially, by saying, hey, there needs to be these 2 types of things. The first is governed by, and yes, these are control charts, is governed by control chart thinking. We keep the processes that we've got. We maybe make little improvements, but they're not overarching goals. It's just kind of keeping business intact and reacting when we need to, but otherwise keeping things on a level playing field. And then there's breakthrough strategies, and these are the things that we focus to make in the annual plan and in the long-term plan. And we think of those as timelines, not with control limits, but with spec lines. So, for example, we may have a long-term goal on unit cost, but on a day-to-day basis, we're not going to be able to necessarily even hit that, right? We're going to do that in chunks. And they may even be nonlinear chunks, like I've given right here, or availability of our servers, or whatever. So that's the key thing: is that there's 2 parts to this. Now, I think a lot of places will say when you deploy Hoshin Kanri, you want to look for 80-20, but obviously that can vary. If you're a company like Microsoft, and you're talking about maybe you're a company that is a supplier of a call service, of call center expertise and personnel to Microsoft, maybe you're going to have 90-10. But if you're Apple, you probably are putting more than 10% or maybe even more than 20% into your breakthrough strategies. Now, there's two different types of Hoshin methodologies. The one on the left is more popular in Japan. It's called the X matrix. The planning table is something that I find is used more commonly in America. And they both basically handle the same thing. They're a way to deploy throughout the organization from a top level down. How do we decide if, for example, I have certain targets that I need to meet? How does that get deployed throughout the organization? And keep in mind there will be planning tables for business as usual and for the annual plans for the breakthrough plans. So here's an example for the of how it works, of how the plans are deployed for the business fundamentals. And for business fundamentals, and I've taken it at the VP level, but it could be at whatever your level is. So if you happen to be a COO, which one of us on the call is, that would be the level that you'd start. If you happen to be a director, maybe that's the level that you can start. In any event, it's the level that you're at, and then it would be deployed downward. So whatever you think about the situation, the mission, and then multiple activities, okay? And they get deployed downward. So the idea would be that these 4 activities here are not the same as the 4 activities here. So I might have one director who's dealing with some of these activities and so forth. The same thing works for the breakthrough plans, except now we've got strategies instead of simple activities, right? So the strategy might be that we're going to run a product or a project to increase whatever. Like, for example, if I'm at Connecticut, Michelle is the executive vice president of sales. She may have grow customer. She may have on her activities, it may be, her metrics may be based around current membership levels or current customer base, and Dan's might also be looked at, as in terms of customer base, but also maybe a little bit more. Dan is somebody who reports to her. It might be a little more tactical, like productivity of the salespeople in large group. And then in terms of the breakthrough strategies, at the VP level or at the executive level, Michelle, who is the executive vice president of sales, her strategies might be leverage new products in the small market segment, and Dan may not have any of those. But Terry, who also works for Michelle, may have some very tactical plans that are within there. It wouldn't be leverage the entire thing. It would be maybe leverage a few of these products this year and so forth. Here's what a planning table looks like, and I'll just kind of run through this. Each planning table has an objective, and you can see there's an owner to all of these things. It describes a situation, which is why the objective is important. Articulates the strategies. Again, if this were the business as usual plan or business fundamentals, it would have the activities that are listed in there. And then finally, what are the metrics and deliverables for the objective, and then each of the strategies that are underneath that. And like I said, it works really well with balanced scorecard and so forth. If you want to know more, there's a nice publication. It's actually really kind of boring to listen to, but it's very clear, and it's by a man named Pete Babich. I'm just being honest. Really not understanding why I get that sometimes. Let me just choose my pen here. So I'll just write his name. It's Pete Babich. and he actually has some. I think he was at HP. That's where he did his work, and he has some. He actually has some software to do some of this stuff, but very clear stuff. Before we move on, I did want to, because I had kind of a special request for this, I wanted to talk through a little bit about what were some pitfalls and what are some tips if you're trying to roll this out. And I've rolled this out in a couple of different companies and worked with people and to do this. And there are definitely some pitfalls and things to look out for. So I wrote some of these down and maybe some advice, some do's and don'ts, so to speak. So some of the things that really come up often are way too many initiatives. So when you're starting out in Hoshin, initiatives and objectives and metrics. So people like to overdo. Here's all the, especially on the breakthrough plans, just too many breakthroughs. Start with business fundamentals. Start with business fundamentals and nail that. Ugh, can't spell. So that's definitely something that's there. A lot of Hoshin initiatives focus on breakthrough only, and what really happens is if you focus on breakthrough only and forget about the business fundamentals, eventually you only do business fundamentals anyway. Another huge mistake is to not have the review process. So no review. So the basic advice that I have on there is set real dates for review. And when I'm talking about review, I'm talking about sort of the review of the projects and the really looking to see, are we on track, are we not on track. Another thing is secrecy. A lot of management likes to keep Hoshin plans and things like that in their strategic plans from their employees. I think that's not a good idea. Is it okay to keep it away from competitors? Sure, but the secret plans that we're executing on, keeping it secret from the employees, not always good. So socialize. I guess that's just do the opposite, kind of George Costanza advice. Another is to overanalyze, I want to say over plan. I guess I'll put it there. To try and think of creating a perfect Hoshin. There is no such thing as perfect Hoshin. So do it in steps. Part and parcel with this is to say that the only way that we can do Hoshin is if we start at the top of the organization. That's simply not true. If you can start in your organization and make a commitment to do it in your organization, then you can start to make it happen. All it really is a way of governance in terms of metrics, in terms of objectives, in terms of strategies, in terms of resources, and helps you really kind of understand how all those things come in. And then I guess one last thing I wanted to point out is compensation. I think people get kind of confused. I'll just say they get kind of bogged down into putting compensation into those performance measures. I really think of Hoshin as separate. It's a management tool. Compensation that can be handled. That's a huge topic, and I think it's just best to kind of avoid those if you can. Some other sort of helpful, hopefully helpful advice is as you're deploying it downward, metrics are often a problem. So there's often fear associated with metrics. People don't like to be measured, and people choose too many metrics. They choose too few, and they can choose the wrong ones. The advice I can give you is let them do it. Let them do it. And correct. So for example, one manager that I had who was like when I did this at Corning, they were a team leader. They came back and they said, I'm going to measure these 10 things every month. Well, it turned out that they were wasting so much time, spending so much time just measuring those 10 things that it became very burdensome. And the whole point was to keep it open-minded, and we could adjust that as we went along. That's particularly easier if you start with business fundamentals instead of launching directly into breakthrough. And then perhaps maybe the a real one of the biggest ones is kind of treating, I guess I'll say treating control limits and goals the same. And I want to make sure that we understand that this is business fundamentals. This is our control chart, right? This is our control chart. And this is not. This is breakthrough. This is breakthrough. This is, a goal that we're trying to shoot for, but we're not there yet. Very often, these breakthrough goals are met in nonlinear fashion. So just to as you're looking at it, I'll draw it up maybe a little bit better. As you're trying to hit this, there's a tendency for people to say, okay, we are here. If I need to meet that goal in 2 years, let me just draw a line and then measure ourselves every month. The problem with breakthrough goals is they often don't happen like that. They often happen in a nonlinear way. So just be aware that that can happen as you finish and execute the projects. You should see jumps like this, meeting breakthrough. It shouldn't necessarily be linear. So those are just some things where some advice on what can go wrong, what can go right, and all the rest of that. Okay. I'm going to move on from Hoshin, but I'd love to hear your comments on that. Hoshin's really cool, and I'm happy to talk with you more about it and to share my experiences. But just wanted to give you a flavor today about what Hoshin was and all the rest. Okay, so we've just got a couple of people on now. Sue, are you still on? Okay, all right. I guess what I'd like to do then is I'm going to move on to the last part, which is really basically how do you grow as a green belt or as a Lean Six Sigma professional. And I want to share with you at least a little bit of a perspective on this. And as somebody who's been in this for a long time, thought he knew everything to start, and continues to be humbled every day. It's a rewarding thing, and we're happy to be with you to help you in any way that we can, whether it's helping directly with sharpening the tools that you've learned, or by direct consulting. You can always contact us. In a general sense, if you're a green belt, you should be focused on achieving well-focused goals. I know that the green belts that are in this particular course are sort of atypical. Business, in this case, business leaders, as opposed to people are going to be executing on small projects, and that's great. I think that you can really leverage the skills that you have and have learned in this class to ask better questions of people, and to perhaps choose better projects, choose projects more powerfully. And as you're growing, you can learn more about some of the concepts like Hoshin Kanri, some of the other types of tools like Design for Six Sigma or methodologies. Spend some time learning about what are the aspects of good Six Sigma governance that are there in terms of people selection, project selection, building pipelines, and all that. And encourage people to do the right thing. Even if you don't maybe get or understand the mechanics of designed experiments, you should be able to understand why so often they're important to run, and to support people in doing that, and to reach out when something is not understood. If you're a black belt, it's really time to start scoring big points, as I say, and continue to grow in the tools, but also grow in some other areas. It's really time to start stepping up and working with senior and more high-profile projects, and really make sure that they come through and get delivered. I want to share with you before